All right, so I've been saving my opinion on The Last of Us Season 2 because I had a few thoughts after the first episode and kind of wanted to see how things played out before I fully shared them, where I knew that they were going to change things, and indeed they did, where they showed us a little bit more of Abby than initially planned, a little bit more of Ellie, and even some more of Joel, and they even had an interaction in the last episode. And so I had feelings of, this seems pretty good, but I want to see how it plays out, and I knew that this episode was probably going to help solidify my feelings to some of the changes. And I officially want to say, as someone who is genuinely a massive, massive fan of part 2, this might actually be better. Let's dive into it. So first off, I just want to say this is the craziest episode of The Last of Us we've ever received. The complaint from the first season, the biggest complaint I ever heard, was that they essentially were too shy on the action, especially for an adaptation of an action game. Well, boy, do they address that concern. In this episode, it's almost this one gigantic fight scene. And on top of that, they don't just address the concerns from the first season, they address some of the concerns and feedback from the second game, which I want to dive into. But I genuinely think that this is probably a better story, that if this was what was initially received in part 2 in the game, I think that it would have been received a lot better, and I'll dive into why. But the main point, which kind of comes at the beginning of the episode with Ellie and Jesse's conversation, is there's closure. I think that was the biggest thing I felt from the second game, is even when it ends, you just feel this ache inside of you that there was never any closure between Joel and Ellie. You get one glimpse of it at the very end of the game. And so, sorry, full spoilers if you haven't played the game. We're diving in. Hopefully you read the title. But you get a little glimpse of it, but then it was taken away, where Ellie, you don't even know if she fully forgave Joel, because she says she wants to try. And then that's as far as they ever went. And then he dies the next day, which again will happen in this show, that they've set that up, that conversation obviously happened the night before. That's why all of a sudden Ellie has that change of heart and it surprises Jesse. But you even see that it's changing her. Like, she wants to go on a patrol with Joel again, like old times. And then she even says something that, to me as a fan, just hit me so deeply, when she essentially said something like, people have fights, but we're Joel and Ellie. Like, at the end of the day, no matter what stuff we're going through, we're Joel and Ellie, and we stick together. And that, for me as a fan, that closure, I didn't realize how long I've been waiting for that closure as a fan, that I immediately felt like, I think that's the ache that so many people felt from the second game, that it wasn't necessarily the different story beats, but it was that sense of just having something ripped from you in a way that didn't feel satisfying, where you can have a horrible story that leaves you depressed afterward, but still honors you as a fan. And it felt like even just that line, knowing that Ellie felt that, was like so impactful to me. It sounds silly, but genuinely as a fan, it's hard to express, where I was like, I have been waiting so long, for 4 years, 5 years now, to have that kind of closure between Joel and Ellie, and I got it in the first minute, or not exactly the first minute, but I got it right away in this episode. And that's, to me, why I think that this is actually probably a better story than part 2 initially was. Regardless of how you feel about part 2, I love it. I think it's a masterpiece, but I will say the fact that it's that divisive amongst fans shows that even though I love the story, it could have been done in a way that was better, because you can tell a story like that without driving away your fan base. And I really feel like they've done that here. We also learned a little bit. I'm just going to go through the episode. We learned a little bit about Eugene, because we heard that Eugene had been killed by Joel, and there was a mystery to that. And I had a feeling of like a little Rick Grimesy, where Joel essentially had to put down Eugene, and it turns out that is the case. It sounds like he got infected and Joel had to kill him. A little bit there, I was wondering if he, because he was a Firefly, found out about Ellie and Joel killed him, but it seems like he just killed him because he was infected. And then we come into some things that are interesting, is course, right away we have some changes again, that it's not Dena and Ellie who go out on this trip. It's actually Ellie and Jesse, which makes far more sense. So you're not going to partner two people who are probably the weaker members of the group physically, that you would put someone who's maybe a little bit physically weaker with someone who's a bit stronger. It makes sense that Dena would ride with Joel and that Ellie would ride with Jesse, and I actually really liked that shift. I thought that made a lot more logical sense if you're running kind of searches and search groups to go out and kind of look for hordes. And of course they bring up this looming thing of like, hey, we ran into this horde of all these frozen infected, and all of a sudden we had like a bunch of infected under them that were staying warm, and it seems like it might be a problem, and indeed it actually is a massive problem. And then we kind of go back to Abby, where we've seen a little bit of her in this episode, where they kind of do the opening of the game, but they do it in a different way, where Abby and Owen go off on their own. Instead, they kind of stick around, and Abby just goes out to kind of patrol. But then, of course, she sees Joel riding with Dena, doesn't know it's them, but kind of wants to investigate because she wants to move forward. And what I thought was really interesting is that Owen already had a plan to have her not move forward with this, because they've looked at Jackson like, dude, we're gonna die. This is a suicide mission. This doesn't make any sense. We cannot go through with this. And I actually really like that Owen had already decided we're not doing this. And almost everybody seemed to agree with him of like, yeah, we don't need to do this. Like, Abby's kind of off a rocker on this one. We need to go back. But of course, Abby falls, and then she falls into the pit of infected. And she wakes them up, that she causes the assault on Jackson, and she causes a giant horde of infected to be awakened and come after them. And so then we get this incredible action sequence of her running away from them, which is almost like beat for beat for the game. And then she has to crawl through the fence as they're all coming in, and then Joel saves her. But this time it's Joel and Dena, and they ride off to go back. While all of that is happening and the infected is chasing them, eventually the tendrils that we saw in the end of last episode get triggered in Jackson, and then we see the entire horde turn from following Joel and Abby and Dena to heading toward Jackson. And I love that Joel is like, we need to turn around, we need to go and fight. And I also love how Abby tricks him and is like, hey, let's go back. Like, I've got a group of people, we've got weapons, we can help you fight. And she tricks him in that moment to go back. That it makes far more logical sense than Joel, who I would agree, storytelling wise, in the second game at that point was a different person than he was in the first game, because he had lived a comfortable life for quite a while in Jackson at that point and had let his guard down. And so while I will argue with fans who have a big nitpick with that, this is actually one of the ways they deal with it. Is one, it's not Joel and Tommy together where they're both sussing out what's going on with this group. It's Joel and Dena, and Joel doesn't just go back and is like, hey guys, let's hang out. My name's Joel. What's your name? That instead Abby just overhears that his name is Joel and figures out who he is pretty quickly, because she has a description of what he looks like. And so he never introduces herself, he never introduces himself. But in addition to that, he just doesn't go and hang out with them for a bit to ride out a storm. He immediately wants to go back and fight. And the only reason he agrees to go back is because she's telling them, hey, we'll come and fight with you. And he sees this giant horde heading toward Jackson. I really liked that switch up where it addresses some of the concerns fans had before from the previous game. And then we continue to see the assault on Jackson, and it is an incredible action sequence of just a horde of infected running into the wall, them throwing down these barrels of gasoline, exploding them, lighting them on fire. They're just using every bit of ammunition they have, and it's not good enough. And eventually the infected seem to learn that this isn't working and try a different part of the wall. And this time when the bloater shows up, and the bloater breaks through the wall, and then we get this great action sequence of just this horde invading Jackson, of them on the rooftop shooting, and then you've got Tommy and his group down below with the flamethrowers trying to take them out, and then the dogs get released and just like assault the infected. It was really, really well done. And then the chase scene between Tommy and the bloater, and I think correct me if I'm wrong, but this is the first time in the show that we've seen a bloater be taken down, because I actually think in season 1 we saw a bloater show up, but he essentially just crushed everybody and then they ran away from it. But here we finally see a bloater get taken down, and it takes quite an amount of effort. And I was actually really worried, because there's this thing that's happened in TV shows recently that drives me nuts, where you have one of the main characters who should be someone you can root for and trust, and essentially they turn into a dummy who needs to get saved by a character who's a lot weaker than them. And I was really scared when his flamethrower was running out that he was going to have Maria show up and she would shoot the bloater in the head and Tommy would be saved by Maria. And I love that they didn't do the cliche thing, because I've gotten so tired of that trope. It happens in so many shows and movies now where it's just so predictable. And I love that he actually did end up killing it, and that it eventually just burned itself to death, even though he ran out of fuel, and that he defeated it. I really did love that, because that's been something that's bothered me for quite a while in TV shows that I've just seen over and over again, and I was really happy to see that they could have leaned into it and they intentionally didn't. And I love that, where they just let Tommy be the hero in that scene. And so then again, we go back to Joel, and he goes into the house where they're staying, and pretty immediately is like, we gotta go. The problem is that Dena already has bad frostbite. You see Mel trying to help her, which was really cool to see her use her medical knowledge, because in the game it was always like, oh yeah, she's a nurse, she kind of does stuff, but you never really saw it. And here you could see her like genuinely caring for Dena, trying to make sure she's okay, all of those different things. And I wondered, okay, what are they gonna do here? Because this feels quite different than the game. And I was like, is Joel gonna randomly introduce himself? And again, he doesn't. That instead, Abby introduces him, because she overheard his name, and she does it by introducing all of them, and then goes, oh yeah, and this is Joel. And you just see again the room shift, and Joel immediately is like, oh no, that he's realized he's fallen into a trap. And of course, this time it makes sense. He was in a mode of panic. He needed help. He needed to quickly run in and get ammunition and then run back out. And he was not planning on staying. And he realizes, oh my goodness, I've ran into a trap. And I like that they gave Abby space to speak in this, that she got to say some words to Joel, which I thought was really interesting, because in the game we really don't see her say much. That pretty much immediately Joel's like, get your speech over with, and she moves on. But here we kind of get to hear the speech that she had prepped, and I thought it was really compelling and interesting, and it let you dive a bit deeper into her character and how she saw things. Of course, she reveals that the doctor was indeed her dad, and you just see Joel kind of non-responsive, but hearing this long speech. And then of course she then eventually shoots Joel in the leg. And then what I love is they don't just beat Dena in the head with a gun, which could have killed her. That instead they intentionally knock her out with an injection that Mel has, which I thought was a really interesting take, because again, they're not in here for blood to just kill a bunch of people. They're here for one person. And the contrast between Joel and them is that Joel, in trying to save one person, was willing to kill everyone, and them in trying to kill one person is willing to save everyone else. It's really interesting what they do here. And so then Dena falls asleep because they inject her, and then she tortures Joel. But again, she continues to talk to him and ramble and rant, and I found it really interesting to hear Abby get those 2 minutes with Joel to say her piece. And then I was like, I wonder if they're going to do the golf club thing. And I always felt, as a big Walking Dead fan of the comic book and of the show, where the initial Joel death was very Negan-like. That it was very similar to when Glenn died in The Walking Dead. And I was always kind of surprised at how blatantly similar those two things were. And I feel like Craig Mason felt the same as well. And especially in making a show, The Walking Dead was such a huge TV phenomenon. And most of the viewers who watched the show have seen the episode where Glenn dies. I feel like they didn't want to repeat that or have people feel like, oh, they're just ripping off The Walking Dead. And so I like what they did in here, because Abby's not as physically strong as she was in the game, and she doesn't even seem as violent as she was in the game. There's almost like a small hesitation that Caitlin does in portraying her. But you can see that she wants to kill Joel, but there's like a little bit of hesitation in her just torturing someone to death. And she does go through with it, though, but I like that she eventually goes, she goes to go get the golf clubs, and then Joel, after listening to like this speech for so long, is like, can you seriously stop with the speech and just kill me already? Like, what are we dragging this thing on for? And so then she grabs the golf club, and I thought she was going to go for the head to beat him to death in the same way to the game, but she actually goes for the leg to essentially torture him for as long as she can. And then we cut away and see Ellie approaching the place where that's happening with Joel. This time she comes in through the basement and comes up, because of course it's not happening in the basement. And at that point we see that Abby has moved from beating him with the club to just like pounding him with her fists, that it's become deeply personal. And I also like that as well, because to kill someone in that way, it's like what the Joker says in The Dark Knight, I'm pretty sure, where he's like, to use a gun is one thing, but to use like a knife, it's way more personal, it's way more kind of cruel. And you see her, that she's using the most personal instrument she can. Like, she is physically beating Joel to death, and there's nothing Joel can do because he's been so maimed at this point. And everyone's trying to tell her to stop, to be like, hey, I think we've had enough, and she just won't stop. The rage is kind of taken over in her brain. And so then Ellie busts in, and it's very similar to what happens in the game, except Ellie fights back a little bit more in this, where we see she's had some combat training, some martial arts training, and she tries to, but ultimately there's too many of them. They take her out the same way they do in the game, and instead of beating in Joel's head one last time with a golf club, she actually breaks the golf club, which I've also always thought, because I'm like, I don't know if Neil Druckmann has golfed a lot, but golf clubs, yes, you could start maybe torturing someone with it, but eventually that thing's going to snap. It's not made for that. And so I actually like that the golf club snapped. It was more realistic than what happened in the game. And then she then just decides to stab him in the neck. And what I love, and again, talking about closure, that they did differently in this, is they don't just immediately knock Ellie out. Ellie at this point is no threat. They essentially take her out, that she gets incredibly winded, and then they just book it out of there, where they've done what they've come to do, and they're going home. And they leave, and then Ellie gets this beautiful moment with Joel that we never got in the game, where she gets to... Oh, I also love the moment where she tells Joel to get up, and you see Joel actually try, and he lifts his head up. And I just love that even in the last moments, Joel is trying to do what he can for Ellie. It was really beautiful. And then the moment that they have where she crawls over to him afterwards and just holds him as he dies. Whew, that's, that was meaningful to me as a fan. And there's things I really like about the game and how they handled this, but I actually think, as a fan and as someone who deeply cares about Joel, it's very dumb that I'm getting emotional about this. It's a bunch of fictional characters, but just the way that they did this, the closure that it felt like I got as a fan, that I've been waiting for 5 years, to know that at the very least, even though their journey's come to an end, that Joel got to die while Ellie was holding her, genuinely means a lot to me as a fan. And I'm really thankful to Craig that he was able to faithfully adapt this story and honor what was there, but also I think do it in such a way that will bring other fans along. And as someone who is a deep fan of this franchise, and Joel is probably my favorite fictional character of all time, for him to have more closure and be honored more in his death, I found it, I really did appreciate it as a fan, and I think that other fans will too. And so overall, I think this season's off to a great start. I think so far they're handling this story better than the game did, in a way that will probably be received much better than the game was. And I'm someone, again, who actually genuinely loves part 2. I think it's a masterpiece. I love the story. But I think this is better. And I think that having time to reflect on it, having time to hear some of the criticisms, and having a different voice in the room who, by listening to all the podcasts, Craig is constantly asking, does this make logical sense? And is pointing out loopholes and things that don't make sense logically. It seems like that has had them to be able to craft a story that maybe we should have gotten in that second game. And maybe the fan base would be in a different spot. But I'm really thankful that we have this moment for closure. As crazy as that sounds about a fictional character in a video game, I genuinely am thankful for that and for what this season has done. But with all that being said, I want to know your thoughts. Do you agree with me? I know that for some people, changing things isn't going to sit right with them. And again, I get it. I'm a big fan of part 2. I also am really curious if those of you who didn't like part 2 initially, if how this was done is more satisfying to you than the original story. Does this make you appreciate the show more? Does it make you feel the closure that I'm feeling? What did you think about that crazy action scene that they showed with like hundreds, probably thousands of infected coming at Jackson? And where do you think they're going to go from here? How do you think Tommy's going to play into it? Because he didn't watch Joel die. So how is that going to go? Do you think Tommy knows that Joel killed all the Fireflies? Because we haven't seen that yet. I would love to know your thoughts. Let me know in the comment section down below. Like, comment, subscribe, all that junk. I can't wait for the next episode. I will see you guys in the next one.